Hey, welcome to the Coffee with the Doctors podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris.
And I'm Dr. Liesel.
And we shine a light on the powerful scholarship emerging from Michigan's practitioner scholars working in K-12 schools. Each episode, we sit down with educators, leaders, researchers whose work is shaping classrooms, guiding policy, and transforming communities.
All right, so time to settle in and join us as we elevate the voices, ideas, and innovations driving Michigan's educational future.
Hey, so usually, Liesel, you hit us with so Chris, what's on the agenda for this week? But Liesel, I think you have gained some expertise in actually queuing up the show. So we're going to switch that up. And I'm going to ask you, Liesel, aka Dr. Liesel, what's on the agenda for this week?
All right, well, thanks, Chris. We are fortunate to have our friend and colleague, Dr. Coby Fletcher, here with us. And we wanted to dig in. Our primer for this week is the ongoing research from the Wallace Foundation that talks about the role of principal leadership. And that summary report of 2023, I remember when it came out, and we've talked about it a lot. So how principals have that real substantial effect in school level student achievement. And through those key leadership principles of strategic management, facilitating collaboration amongst their staff, setting that positive adult and child school climate, and through their instructional leadership. And we're so fortunate to have Coby on today because he really dug into what does a district do to create the conditions for school leaders to be successful. And so we love being learners and we're excited today.
Well, Lisa, if I could, just before we introduce the man of the North, um, just to preface a little bit with that Wallace Foundation article, we mentioned it in a previous show when we did on Dr. Harvell. It's been a really, really influential piece for both of our learning. But as is the theme with this show, we don't need to go outside of Michigan to figure out what works well in schools. And so Dr. Fletcher, his research kind of builds on some of those ideas.
Absolutely. So Chris talked about how Dr. Coby Fletcher is the king of the North. So his pathway to Escanaba has taken him from Utah to Texas to Michigan. He was a principal in Battle Creek and then in East Lansing Public Schools before he took the superintendency in 2017 in Escanaba in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He told us this morning that they got 10 inches of snow yesterday and expecting a couple feet this week. And so we're just going to get started. Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
So can you give us kind of a high-level summary of your dissertation in practice that you completed? You were second cohort of the doctoral program in educational leadership?
We were cohort 2, so a 2016 graduate. So yeah, we wanted to focus in on really what were some of the impediments to effective principal practice, and then what are some of the things that you can do at the district level to improve principal practice. We started from the premise that principals are an overlooked resource. So the initial research we did was looking into how much do principals really matter. And one of the things we found is once you control for everything, and if you're looking at the things that a school does and can control and can do to influence a student's learning and academic development, a highly effective principal can account for up to around 20% of that. Now that's rare, right? It's usually a little bit less, but when you factor in everything, if you've done statistics, 20% of something is still fairly significant. And if you don't have things in place and you just automatically eliminate, that potential for a 20% impact on what kids learn and how well they do in schools, you've already set yourself back, right? You're going to be a B school at best. So, we started from that. We said principals are important. And then we really looked into the research into what are the issues that principals face, right? What keeps them from being effective? And we found three things that were key. One is workload, the second is incoherence, and then the third is isolation. And if you look at workload, one of the things that anybody who has been a campus principal knows is that the demands of the day often keep you from doing the things that you need to do in order to be effective.
Amen, Kobe.
So
Man, look, hold up. Listen. I'm supposed to just let you cook, and that's what you're doing now. I don't know that I was really ready for all the resonance that's taking place in my soul. So I'm gonna let you get back on the Howard, but we just got to pause for that first point. Let it settle in real quick.
Right. I mean,
Oh,
if you're a principal, I'm definitely not telling you anything you don't
my
know.
God, my God.
So, the
All right.
workload can be intensive, right? Because
Yes,
you've
sir.
got issues with students,
Wow, wow.
and then you've got oftentimes issues with adults. Sometimes those are the parents of students, and sometimes those are the adults that work in your school. You've got all of the things during the day that you're expected to do, be out in the hallway between classes, be out greeting kids before school starts, be in the lunchroom,
Oh, my
and then
gosh.
be watching dismissal. You put it all together, and really the day to day workload that principals have prevents them from getting to the things that they need to do. So when do they do that? Right? They push it into after school hours. And so they're there, for hours after work, actually going through and reading their emails and then trying to get to the things that they need to do to be truly effective. And if you're a secondary principal, you're squeezing that in between events and things like that happen after school. So the workload is just enormous for principals. And that feeds into the whole incoherence aspect because one of the mantras that principals hear all the time is that they have to be instructional leaders. And you struggle with instructional leadership when your day is spent doing things that aren't necessarily directly connected to instructional leadership. Uh, so there's some incoherence there. And then you have the things that the district office wants you to do. In addition, you might have district level initiatives that you're expected to then drive down into your campus and get done. And all of that is disconnected in general from your day to day routine, right? So there's a significant amount of incoherence there. And then the third is isolation, which at first sounds a little bit odd because you're surrounded by people all the time and you're dealing with people all the time. The isolation really comes from the preponderance of negative interactions that principals have. It's very rare that anybody's ever coming into a principal's office to pat them on the back and tell them what a great job they're doing.
Mhm.
The principal is the person that is on the receiving end of everybody's problems. You're expected to fix them, or
Mhm.
do something about it, or doggone it, we have a code of conduct. Why don't you follow it? Or those sorts of things. So you have all of these negative interactions, and that can be isolating because you're not having positive interactions with anybody.
Yeah.
The only people as an administrator that you typically share those positive relationships with professionally are other principals. They know what you're going through, they can kind of commiserate with you. And you don't have the opportunity to be with and around those people very often. You might have a monthly meeting or something like that. But other than that, you're kind of isolated in your job. And those are significant. I mean, those are huge barriers to overcome. I think a lot of people just look at that and say, well, that's the terrain.
Yeah.
That's how it is. That's just what I've got to do. And we kind of stepped back and said, well, are there some things that you can do at the district superintendent central office level that are going to make life better for principals and allow them to really be effective in promoting high quality instruction and engagement on their campuses. And the overall or the overarching theme here is this, right? as a instructional leader on your campus, you're really kind of charged with creating the conditions that are going to allow teachers and students to flourish. That's how we really ought to define instructional leadership
Mhm.
is that way. It's not going in and telling teachers how to teach or going in and doing, your walkthroughs or evaluations. Those are pieces, but those things don't really do much to create the conditions that you need to create for strong instruction engagement on a campus. Well, at the district level, so you go up a level there, it should be just as much the responsibility of district officials to create the conditions in which their campus administrators or their direct reports can flourish and do what they need to do. So that responsibility is often ignored because at the central office, unfortunately, the nature of bureaucracy is that it often just starts to exist for its own ends. Instead of thinking about my job in terms of making it possible for my direct reports to flourish in what they do, um, I can easily get caught up in my own importance. And, well, obviously, if I think these are the things that need to be done, I just tell you, and then poof, by magic, it all happens. And district administrators can't approach the job that way. You actually have to find ways to overcome the workload issue, the isolation issue, and then the incoherence issue. So we can talk more specifically about what or district administrators can do for that. If you want, you asked me to give a high level thing, and I've already probably rambled on for about 10 minutes. But we could talk about that, or if you want to ask me some specific questions about what we've talked about so far, I'll be quiet and answer those for you.
Well, I just thought Dr. Printy would be proud.
So Dr. Printy was the very first person I met that was associated with the program. Uh, Back in that day, they were visiting campuses, recruiting directly.
Mhm.
And so I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Printy, about what I was doing and where I thought I might be going. And she was heavily involved in not only getting me into the program, but she was also a connection when the East Lansing job came open. And I became principal there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of sad to see the number of people that were in the program back in that day who have retired and gone on, to more relaxing things as they
Yeah.
should. Uh, but Susan was one of the main contacts for me early on.
Well, if I
I
can
think
jump
about
in. Oh, go ahead. You
her.
go.
I was just going to say, I think about when you defined like what educational leadership is around
Yeah.
creating those conditions and that concept of parallel process, like that was so Susan, right? Like
Yeah.
she really had pulled together all of this. And it's not just her, it's
Yeah.
what the whole research base says. But I think about that and I couldn't help make that connection
Yeah.
that go ahead, Chris.
Well, so you're speaking my language right now. You've got a Bible out and I'm reading it, and the church is saying amen. Um, Prior to kind of laying out your DIPS assessment of what the challenges are to instructional leadership, I'm sure you did a lit review in your work, and I'm wondering what are the practices that are the most effective for principals as they seek to kind of improve outcomes for students.
So what kinds of things do principals do? Is that
Yeah,
what you're
yeah,
is that what
yeah, yeah.
okay. So I approach the principalship and what you can do in order to be most effective on your campus
Yeah,
in terms of the systems that you put in place.
yeah.
And I think you have to start from the premise that you hire experts to do a particular job.
Hmm.
And if you hire them to do a particular job, they have to be free is not the right word, but they have to have an area of defined autonomy
Yeah,
in which they can do their work.
yeah.
Because if people don't have a sense of autonomy, right, in what they do, if they are not able to develop a sense of a feeling of mastery
Hmm.
in what they do, then it's going to be hard for them to be effective. They're going to struggle. So as a campus administrator, you kind of sit back and think, okay, what systems do I put in place that help promote that?
Hmm.
And one of the terms that we use quite frequently is the term collaboration. Uh,
Mhm.
it's a broad enough term that anybody can give really whatever meaning they want to give to that term. But for collaboration to be truly effective, it has to exist within a defined system of practices. There have to be norms for how we collaborate. And those norms don't necessarily come from the campus administrator. They can come from within the group, and they're typically best when they do. But you have to give place and time for those things to happen. So one good example of that would be when we were in Battle Creek. I came there as the turnaround principal.
Hmm.
Battle Creek had been put on the list of persistently lowest achieving schools, which meant that they were academically within the bottom 5% in the state. So it was a time of crisis. And one of the benefits of coming in a time of crisis is that most people recognize that there need to be major changes put in place in order for success to occur. That's kind of a nice thing. You don't walk into that very often as an administrator. Most people want things to stay the way they've been.
Yeah.
So we did a couple of things to encourage collaboration. Number one, we did a flexible schedule. So we balanced 45-minute periods with hour-and-a-half periods. And long story short, what that enabled us to do was to allow teachers to have all their traditional prep time, but also to include at least two 45-minute sessions a week in which teachers could meet as a PLC. And so we trained people then in how PLCs function and operate. And once we had all of the necessary parameters in place, we kind of let those PLCs run.
Yeah.
Uh, and what came out of that PLC was a very natural collaboration that allowed teachers to plan and do things that they themselves had not been able to do before. And one of the things that we found was that very kind of simple leverage point uh, paid off. And it paid off in ways that we couldn't have anticipated because teachers were able to do great work that nobody had really even thought about before. And so putting that system in place was super important. One of the other ideas that Susan Printy gave me actually was, hey, maybe you should start thinking about communities of practice too,
Hmm.
which is slightly different from a PLC. A PLC is really kind of focused on one thing, and a community of practice is a little more broad. It is a little less regulated, and it is designed to allow people to gradually integrate themselves into the community of practice and learn from other people around them. And so we've used the community of practice model too in some of the schools that I've been at. In fact, we use it fairly frequently here in Escanaba as a way to just look at and solve issues that might be important to us. But the communication thing is a big deal. And there are different other systems that you look at putting together as a campus administrator. One of the most important ones that you can put in place is a system for communication. And I don't mean just your typical hey, this is what's going on, let's do a newsletter, that sort of thing. You have to have a system of communication that keeps everybody well informed, right? That's your typical staff and also your families. But your communication also has to involve outreach to the community.
Hmm.
You have to have a system of outreach into the community that allows you to build bridges, not just between yourself, your students, and your families, but then also to the community at large.
Yeah.
So you start by looking at who your key constituents are in the community and reaching out to those people, and looking to see where those relationships go, because inevitably what you're going to end up doing is bringing in a larger group of people that are going to support the school in a variety of different ways, right?
Mm.
And you let that flow. So there are other things that you do as a campus administrator, but I think from your lens, the key thing you have to look at is, okay, what are the needs of my building?
Yeah.
What are the needs of my students, the needs of my staff, the needs of their families? What are the systems that I need to build and support within the building that are going to enhance their ability to do the things that they need to do. And you do that. There's no one prescription, I guess. It's really the perspective from which you view it. And I think the systems perspective is probably the best one.
That's awesome.
So good. So, were there any pieces that surprised you about some of your findings?
Uh, yeah, I can tell you the one that surprised me the most, and it's a small one, and it was it's always stuck with me. Um, as part of the literature review that we did, we were looking at many different articles that talked about the impact of not having things in place on campus administrators. And one of the studies that I came across was a study, I think it was, I forget who did it. It was in a medical journal,
Okay.
and it was on the incidence of heart disease and early death in campus administrators. Uh, and as a population, the occurrence of those things among administrators is statistically significant, and measurably higher than what it is in the general population
Wow.
because of issues like workload and incoherence and isolation. Right? When I became an assistant principal, this was in a large building in Texas. We had around 2,500 kids in that building. So it was a very, very busy place. It was hopping, as are most buildings, right? Anywhere you go, you don't have time to take care of yourself. You don't have time for healthy meals. You're inevitably eating when you can, and often that means you're eating things that are easy to grab that aren't all that good for you. You're pushing aside some of the other important relationships in your life because of time constraints. So, with a spouse or a partner or with family. And you're also pushing aside all of those other things that you might do just to take care of yourself personally. So, hobbies, or just in general fulfilling activities. And when you put all that together, it creates huge health issues for campus principals. And I recognize that just in my own career. I was an assistant principal or a principal or an associate principal for about 11 years of my career. And I kind of watched that happen with me. And and it was a surprising finding because it validated not only my own experience, but it also told me that if as a campus administrator or a district administrator, excuse me, you can't create conditions in which your campus administrators or your direct reports can take care of themselves like they're supposed to, you're going to end up with unhealthy, burned out administrators. So that was a
Hmm.
really surprising finding for me.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's good.
wow. Words of warning,
Well,
campus principals.
it was, and it is. I mean,
Cadogan.
yeah, you have to take care of yourself, and one of the reasons you can't is because everybody's demanding things from you.
Yeah.
There's almost no recognition that this is actually a thing,
Mhm.
and it's why people get unhealthy and burn out. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the main drivers.
Yeah. So, how have you mediated that as a district level
Yeah, there we go.
superintendent? Like,
Yeah.
how you have 5 schools in Escanaba?
Hmm.
What
We
does
do.
that look like for you and for how you support your campuses?
So it's funny. One of the things that you figure out early on is it's often the small things that you do
Okay.
that make the big difference. Okay. So whenever I am new to a place, or if I'm not new to a place, but I have new administrators come in, the very first thing I have everybody do, and this sounds kind of funny, but we read a little book,
Mhm.
and it's called the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. So a lot of people are going to be familiar with the 1 Minute Manager
Yeah.
series. Uh, the book, The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, is probably my favorite one, and I think the most applicable to campus and district level administrators, because essentially what it says is that when you're in a leadership position, everybody wants to bring you their monkeys and hang them on your back. So people come into your office and they're like, this is the issue that I have, because that's what people do. They deliver issues to your office. And you never really have the time to deal with those issues right away for the most part. So what do you inevitably end up saying? Okay, well, give me a few days and I'm gonna, I'll figure something out. I'll get back to you. So that's a monkey on your back, right? They've just dumped their monkey onto you.
Mhm.
And we do that all day long
Mhm.
as administrators, right? We just take people's monkeys because we assume that that's our role and that's our responsibility. And one of the things this book teaches is no, your job is not to take other people's monkeys. Your job is to help other people deal with their own monkeys. And so it goes through a series of strategies that you can use so that when people show up and they want to hand off their problems to you, you don't take them, but at the same time, you help them then turn around and deal with their problems. And one of the things that you'll find is when people have to deal with their own problems, suddenly they're not problems anymore, right? And I hate to put it that way, but that's one of the realities is we take on a lot of problems that, number one, aren't really problems, don't really need to be addressed. And if they do, they're best left to the people that actually have the problem. You need to help them develop the capacity to deal with the problem. Um, that's one of the main things that you can teach people to do, right? One of the other things that I do, and my campus principals and directors, I think, would tell you this. Um, I tell them that when school's over, they should really be getting out of their buildings, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of people are going to hear that and think, "Oh, heresy." I mean, how do things work if people aren't in their buildings 24 hours a day, doing things? And the reality is, you've got to be able to look those people in the eye and say, you know what? It's okay if for part of the day you're checking your email and you're responding to your email. Like,
Mhm.
there's no issue with that, right? I mean, that's part of your job. That's something that you should be doing during the day. I also, so when at the secondary level, for instance, one of the big demands is the events that happen.
Yeah.
And principals often get the impression that they're failing somehow if they're not at everything. Um, and I tell campus administrators, you need to be strategically at things. You need to be visible.
Mhm.
Um, but to be visible, for people to think you're involved, you don't have to be visible at everything. Pick and choose what you go to. But as a superintendent, I'm also going to create a little fund over here.
Yeah.
And what you're going to be able to do then is to pay people to be administrator on duty at certain things. Maybe it's somebody who is working their way, through an admin certificate and they need hours or they need the experience. Or maybe there's a staff member who's got a child on the team and they're going to be there and you could have them serve as administrator on duty. So be strategic in what you decide to go to, but don't feel like you need to go to everything. You need to be visible, but you don't need to be visible at everything all the time. And so that feeds into something else that I expect campus administrators to do, and that is to take time to have the meetings they need to have in order to be a highly organized campus. We often push those to outside the day or at other times. And no, you need to be coordinating with your folks. And typically that means you're going to have a meeting to organize the week and do things like that. Get the things done ahead of time that you need to do that will free up the time to make you effective. Spend the time doing that because it's going to pay off in bigger dividends than you just running around like a chicken with your head cut off.
Mhm.
And ultimately, you should not be having to spend enormous amounts of time in your building at the end of the day because I'm giving you permission to get the important work done that you need to do during the day. And I feel like if you do that, in the end, you're actually going to create more time for yourself to
Yeah.
do what you need to do uh, instead of the other way around. And sometimes it just takes a little guidance and permission from district level leaders to say, you know what, I realize it may not be your experience, but this is really okay.
Mhm.
you can do the things you need to do to be effective for the remainder of the week and get out of the building on time and go see your families and engage in the habits or the hobbies that you want to engage in order for you to be healthy. It's always better to have somebody coming back the next day refreshed, right? Because they've, the work is going to be there regardless. You
Absolutely.
set it aside, at the end of one day, you go home, you leave it in the office, and you come back the next day fresh. You're going to be better equipped to deal with what you're going to have to deal with throughout the day than you will be if you got home at 7 or 8 last night, or if there was an activity, maybe 10 last night or 11 last night, and wolfed down some food and then went to bed because you got to get up at 5:30 or 6 the next morning to be in your building at 7:30, right?
Yeah,
uh, a burned out administrator is not going to do great work.
that's right. Well, let me pick up from there. You talked about your work as the turnaround principal in Battle Creek. We've seen that Escanaba has actually increased some of its proficiency scores over the course of your time. I'm wondering on kind of the same vein of effective kind of school-based practices, how we move the needle for students. I hear what you're saying as far as just some strategies to help people maintain their lives in your schools. But as a superintendent, what kind of systems are the best bang for the buck in actually moving the needle for student achievement? Are
Okay.
they, and to what extent are they kind of mirrored as principal practices?
Well, so I don't know if I'd say they're mirrored, right?
Yeah.
What you're developing is a certain set of mutually supporting integrated
Hmm.
practices. Okay.
Hmm.
So it depends a little bit on location. You have to be sensitive to the needs of the place that you're in. Um, but I'll say this: I feel like the biggest bang that we have gotten for our buck in moving the needle academically lately, I would say, since COVID,
Yeah.
has been through investing in mental health and social emotional learning. Okay. And a lot of people have turned those into, well, we have folks that are trying to turn those into bad words.
Hmm.
And they're really not. So I'll
Yeah.
give you an example. If When I first came into Escanaba, the major issue that we had, and this was actually pre-COVID, was a group of students who were so disruptive
Hmm.
that they negatively impacted not only their own learning,
Hmm.
but also the learning of everybody else that was in the classroom.
Hmm.
So if you have somebody who is consistently going off, if you have somebody who is throwing desks or destroying things
Yeah.
or being disruptive, and you're continually having to take that student out or move all your other students out, and nothing ever gets better. It just ends up repeating itself over and over and over again.
Hmm.
You're impacting learning in a negative way. So we actually started a community of practice, and it was made up of staff from many different, who had many different responsibilities in our district, and also some administration to say, okay, how are we going to tackle this problem? Uh, and obviously, the right answer is you do it through a multi-tiered system of support.
There we go.
But if you start off from that premise and you tell people, hey, we're going to build a multi-tiered system of support, you don't get the same response that you do if people suddenly discover that they need it and they build it themselves, right?
Yeah.
So that's what our community of practice did. And at the end of the day, we did something that's kind of unique to the Upper Peninsula. I know there are better resource schools in other parts of the state where this may be the norm. But we said, all right, we've got to have a tier one culture piece, right?
Hmm.
There has to be something here that equips all of our students with the skills they need, first to self regulate, and then second to interact better with peers and adults. And so we investigated that, and we went with Leader in Me. That's Franklin Covey's program. I mean, there are a variety of other ones that are great, right? Don't get me wrong. You could
Mhm.
choose almost any one if it's implemented well. You're going to be okay. Capturing kids' hearts, love and logic,
Yeah.
they're all good. We went with Leader in Me, and then we did a second thing. We said, okay, we have itinerants or specials at the elementary level. We're going to create one that gives social emotional learning instruction to students as an itinerant, right? As a
Mhm.
special, so that K-5, they're exposed to that a few times a week for their entire educational career, right? We're actually going to teach kids strategies in that class.
Okay.
So we implemented that, right? Those are tier one interventions. Those are things that everybody gets. Tier two, what we discovered was we didn't really have the resources to provide it at the time. So what would happen is, a kid is disruptive. Either they get taken into the hall or put back in, or they get sent to the principal's office. If you go straight from the classroom to the principal's office with a disruptive kid, what's the disciplinary consequence going to be for that kid? What do you got in your pocket as a principal? What's ultimately the only thing that you can use? Suspension,
Yeah.
right?
The button.
Um, and there are times when, okay, that's appropriate. Don't get me wrong. But if your only hammer is suspension, right? Every nail that comes to your office ends up at some point getting suspended. You improve
Yeah.
nothing, right?
Yeah.
In fact, it usually makes things worse.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, we got to have at that tier 2 and 3 level something that exists
Mm.
between the classroom and the principal's office. And so we said, you know what? We're going to redirect some of our at-risk funding, and we're going to do two things. One, we're going to put a social worker, a dedicated social worker, on every campus.
Yeah.
People initially look at that and they think, oh my gosh, how can you do that? You got to find these master's level social workers and things like that. Well, actually, no, you don't. If you're serving special ed kids as one of their services, you got to have a master's level social worker. I didn't need people who could do Medicaid billbacks or anything like that. I needed people who had social worker skills. I just can't, really call them social workers. So I had great success hiring BSWs
Mhm.
to fill this need, because they don't have to have a master's degree to do that work. And it allowed me to bring people in that had the skills, and put them to work. So we put one of those on every campus. And the goal there was not just to help students, it was to help students at the tier 2 level, but also to allow staff to learn things. If a social worker is doing good work with students, they're going to go back to the teacher and say, this is what I'm doing with this kid to help improve behaviors. Here are some things that we can do in partnership now to reinforce this and better deal with this in the classroom. So everybody is building capacity from that. And then I also put at-risk coordinators on campus. This is a little trickier, and there are some people who would do what I've done and who wouldn't do what I've done.
Yeah.
When I brought at-risk coordinators on campus, it worked very well for the community I'm in. I looked for former law enforcement folks who were relationship builders. And sometimes you bring up that law enforcement thing and people get a little twitchy about that, and I understand that. But in a community like ours, they're such a key part of the community, and they know everybody, and for generations oftentimes. But if you find that person who was able to do most of their work through the relationships that they've built,
Mm.
um, you have a combination of um, respect, number one, but number two, an ability to really work with people, and not be threatening about it. And so at the tier 2 level, what that did was that put between us and then the office and then the classroom, a space where everybody could learn and develop, right? Kids, adults, both. And then at the tier 3 level, we still use, social workers and folks like that. But it's obviously more intensive, right? And then we did some other things as we went along that we felt like we're just going to add capacity, right? We spent years doing dedicated professional development in trauma informed schools,
Mm.
for instance, or other things like that. That we just, as we came across them, we said that's something that we need to add. But because we had built that system and that structure, we saw huge changes in how our kids behave and how they're able to handle stress and interpersonal relationships and things like that. To circle back,
Yeah.
um, we've seen massive academic gains as a result of that. right? I mean, what it did was it created better conditions for learning. And
Mm,
our staff, instead of struggling on their own to deal with these disruptive incidents and issues, now had support. Things got better in our classrooms, and staff could teach in a more relaxed, probably isn't the right word, but fulfilling and enjoyable environment. Um, and so when we removed some of these distractions by building capacity and having a true MTSS system, um, it improved the learning for our students, immensely. You obviously have to do the right things academically too, don't get me wrong, but if you want bang for your buck, that was where we found it. And it's probably taken us 5 or 6 years really to kind of perfect it and get it humming along.
mhm,
But once it hums along, to steal the Collins analogy, it is a little bit like a flywheel.
Mm.
You get that flywheel spinning, and pretty soon it just keeps spinning on its own. But that's one of the things that we did. And I guess that's one of the things that highlights what you do as a district level administrator, because you're the one who has the responsibility for, now that the system is built or the system is planned out,
mm.
you got to provide the resources to make sure that it can happen.
Yeah,
And that has to happen at your level,
that's
right?
good.
So then, what happens then is the work that the campus administrator does now integrates and meshes with that, right? They become a piece of it. They don't necessarily have to run it. It will run itself once you've set it up correctly and you've given the proper parameters. But the campus administrator now, instead of having to be responsible for it, is in a position to support it. And that's a very different thing.
That's good.
Wow, that's awesome. I feel like this is going to be such an amazing episode to share with district and school leaders. And I so appreciate the intentionality of looking at your systems with that whole child, focus, right? That it's not optional, that just even your planning for that specials teacher, right? It signals so many things, that it's a value. You're not adding one more thing to the teacher's plate, right?
Hmm,
Many
hmm.
times that's how we see it happen, and then it doesn't happen consistently. Um, yeah, there's a lot of amazing things just shared. So, thinking from your current role, and I know you're really involved in professional organizations and collaborations among superintendents, what would school districts look like if superintendents really took to heart some of your findings, both from your dissertation work, but also that you've really lived into for these last 10 years? What would districts look like?
Yeah, I think we would. It's a tough question. I think we would be a little more human uh,
Mm, that's
in
good.
what we do. One of the criticisms that gets levied against school administrators is that they're distant and they're disconnected from the core business of what the district's core business, I guess, which
Mhm,
is student learning, right? It's what
mhm,
happens in the classroom. Uh, and we allow ourselves to get disconnected from that, I think, by getting caught up in the day to day. And when you do get caught up in the day to day, you have a great excuse to be disconnected from the people within your organization. You're never going to get around the fact that school districts are just entirely all about people. Even
mhm,
when you're doing budgets and things like that, it's really all about people. And I think we would have more of a people focus. And because we're that way, I think our communities would see us as more responsive
mhm,
to their needs and to the needs of their children. And that would change, I think, the nature of the collaboration that you do. It would change the nature of the conversations that you get to have with people. And, ultimately over time, it just changes the way that people perceive you. I don't think we'll ever be, people will ever think that we're perfect organizations, and you can't make decisions without upsetting some people, right? But you're going to have more people out there who are going to be speaking for you and on your behalf. than you would otherwise. I think people would look at schools and say, you know what, these people just never lose focus of the fact that what matters is what happens with my kid.
Mhm.
And if more people felt like that, I don't think we would have such a contentious environment around public education in the United States right now, right? I'm not saying that it's the solution to all of our problems, by any stretch, but I think we'd just be more human organizations. We'd recognize more and more that really what makes our organizations function are the relationships that people have amongst themselves, not only within the organization, but then also within the community that supports the organization.
Hmm. That's
Yeah,
good.
good.
Hey, well, I think we've now come to the portion that we've long been waiting for. And also, we're going to start making sure that we have the links to these items in our pod description area. But Dr. Fletcher, if you could, you've given us a lot of good information. I'm wondering if you could tell us what you're reading lately. And I shouldn't guess what it is because if it's totally in a different direction, then this is just gonna go nowhere. But I would just go on a limb and say that it's something human centered. Um, so yeah, what are you reading lately?
Okay.
What would you recommend?
So, all right. So that's
No Simon Sinek. You can't have that. Or
okay.
Malcolm Gladwell. You can't
All
do
right.
that.
No, no, no. And you know what? I'm actually not going to do that. Um, so I'm a pretty avid reader.
Yeah.
Not going to lie.
Okay.
I really truly enjoy reading.
Okay.
So I divide my reading up a couple of different ways.
Okay.
I do read things that I think are going to directly have something to do with
No
what I'm,
Brene Brown.
and I'm not even going to talk Brene Brown. Um, I, and I don't have the book in front of me because it's at home right now, sitting on my table. But so I do every year a book study with our leadership team. And it's a year-long book study. And so we take the book and we divide out the chapters and we assign responsibilities, things like that.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I picked those books for several years. And I finally said, okay, let's let the administrative team, somebody on that team, pick a book that they felt like was valuable,
Mhm.
so that it's not just me. So the book that we're doing in that group this year is a book called Radical Candor, which is about giving feedback to your staff as a leader. And it goes through a variety of different scenarios and strategies and things like that. But basically, what it says is, as a leader, it's your responsibility to be honest with people, every which way, right? We're not just talking about what we might call criticism, but, praise as well falls into this category. And I think the gist of it is that when you balance praise and then feedback on things, that opportunities to improve or do a little bit better, what you do as a leader is you provide guidance to your team that really enhances the direction that the organization is supposed to go. But that's got to be within a context of trust and relationships as well. So Radical Candor, it's a good book if you're looking at things like that. Then on the flip side, I always kind of try to do a little bit of something to keep in touch with my nerdy side. And I do have a nerdy side. So I just finished Empire of the Summer Moon because I'm, from Texas and spent a lot of time in the North Texas area. And much of what happens in that book, it's about Quanah Parker and the Comanches. But much of what happens there is something that, I kind of grew up with that history. A funny story, my grandfather, this has nothing to do with anything, but I'm going to tell you. So my grandfather was good friends growing up. He grew up in Oklahoma, close to what was then, Indian territory. And it had ultimately become just the reservations. But with the grandson of a guy named Ishitai. And Ishitai was a Quanah Parker's medicine man uh,
Mm.
and fell out of favor when his medicine did not protect them from bullets as promised.
Mm.
So it's just a funny connection, right? As I'm reading that book. And then I just finished that one, so I picked up a book called The Roads to Modernity, which is about the American English and French Enlightenments, and how they intersect and connect. So that just keeps me kind of in touch with my nerdy side. Uh, so yeah,
Dr.
that's what I'm reading right now.
Dr. Carlson had forewarned us that this might go into some conversation about your deep French background.
I mean,
As
it
we
could. How much longer do we have?
I feel like we'll need part two for that.
All right. Hey, well, we thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll close this out by saying thank you for joining us on the Coffee with the Doctors pod, where practitioner scholars help us rethink what education can be. We'll see you next time for another conversation at the intersection of research, leadership, and practice.